was the song of a rose-breasted grosbeak. That and the fact that my father chose not to have a paying job the second half of his life. Those two paths converged to direct my career choice. The first one engaged me with the natural world, and the second one tried to force me into a decision about taking a career that would help me support my family for the rest of my life. I was the youngest of 6, and I was easily overlooked. And so I spent much of my childhood playing in a forest behind our home, where there was a wetland and a creek that I was never supposed to cross. And it was that rose-breasted grosbeak, when I heard it singing, I didn't know what it was, and so I went to my mom, and she got down the bird book, and together we went through the bird book, and we found it. And it was my first. And I could see the differences, but I didn't know the names. And my mother ended up teaching me all the wildflowers and the trees and more birds. And I had the curiosity and the attention span to wonder, and I just absorbed it all. In Minnesota, in the wintertime, the silence of winter gives way to the music of water in the spring. And the birds return, and I would go to those woods, and I would seek refuge, and I would read, and I would watch, and I would learn, and I would even go there to sing where nobody could hear me. But as I got older, the tensions rose at home, and I got used to falling asleep and sleeping through the arguing and shouting that went on outside my bedroom door. And one night at supper, my mother was crying, and my brother was cursing under his breath. My father announced that we were moving to the city and to my grandmother's house because he had lost our house to foreclosure. And I had never lived in a city. There were no forests and certainly no streams and no mysterious wetlands. And my life changed very quickly. My imagination and my spirit took refuge in books, and my older siblings moved away very quickly. My middle brother got a job and moved out of state. And my sister, who had been supporting us, moved out of the house the day she turned 21. That left my youngest brother and I, at the ages of 18 and 14, as the heir apparents, as we inherited the responsibility of supporting our parents. My brother should have majored in wildlife management. Instead, he got a job in mechanical engineering because he could get a job to support us. And me, as a young woman heading off to college in the early 70s, what were my career choices that would allow me to support my parents until they died and maybe have a life of my own? Certainly not women's work. Being a secretary or a librarian or a teacher, the pay was at rock bottom. But a doctor, if I was a doctor, maybe I could earn enough money. Going to medical school with the intent of getting a job that pays you enough money to support your parents is not the right motivation. My peers wanted to be doctors. I was 20, I was trapped, and I was pissed. And there was no escape that I could imagine where I could continue to live with myself. In the spring quarter of my junior year in college, a friend suggested that I take an elective, a field botany class. And within 2 weeks of starting that class, the TA quit. So the professor turned to me and said, "Would you be willing to help teach this class?" So strings were pulled, and I ended up being paid to teach the class while I was also getting credit for it. And all of a sudden, college became effortless. And I very quietly, without telling my family, shifted my major from pre-med to botany. And I started taking an hour-and-a-half bus ride across the Twin Cities to volunteer at a local nature center. And what I discovered was I was born to be a naturalist. And my curiosity about the world, and ever since I had learned about that grosbeak with my mother, had given me this gift. And I had a gift to be a really good teacher. And working at that nature center, volunteering there, revealed that to me. And it showed me the path that I was going to go and the path that I needed to stay on. When I informed my parents that I wasn't going to go to medical school, my furious father asked me, "Well, how are you going to help support the family?" And I didn't have an answer. I just knew that I needed to stay on this path. Within a year, he died, a week before I got my degree in botany, and my life changed. I got this first full-time job at a brand new nature center. I designed the trails, I built the trails. I worked with a bunch of juvenile delinquents, and we built a floating boardwalk out across the wetland. And I took senior citizens, like me, on nature walks. I took preschoolers on snowshoe hikes, and I taught owl classes, and it was great. And in 1979, I decided to move out here to Seattle to live with my sister and to be a naturalist, because certainly there was a lot of nature centers out here where I could get a job. Not so much. I got a part-time job at REI, and every day off, I spent my time out in the mountains or kayaking or hiking or biking, and I was just absorbed the Pacific Northwest. It was a great time. And then I landed this full-time summertime gig as a field biologist, where I was hired to help King County inventory the wetlands in the county, like this rare bog. And we were coming home from fieldwork one day, and I said to the county planner, "What do you guys plan to do with all this data about these wetlands?" He didn't know, he looked puzzled. I suggested that perhaps they write some regulations about helping protect wetlands. So I was hired on contract from the county to draft those management guidelines. And I then crafted the first wetland regulations for King County, and those became the standards for every city. You can't do that to me. I have a timer, and and Lynn's gonna yell at me if I go over time. So I had to learn about environmental law very, very quickly. I had to educate developers and applicants, and they were not happy students about it. And the county started getting these wetland reports in. They didn't have anybody to review these wetland reports. I had to review the wetland reports, and hence came this very complex circle. I left the county, and I started my own environmental consulting firm, and I did scientific research, and then I designed habitat restoration projects like this one that we're looking at up here at Magnuson Park. I eventually helped to develop a curriculum at the University of Washington focused on wetland science and management and environmental law, and I have taught in that program for the last 20 years. I'm mostly retired now. I am still fascinated by the earth. I'm still looking up birds, and I think I will probably always be teaching something somewhere, as long as there are rose-breasted grosbeaks singing. Thanks, Mom. Thank you.